Hey everyone, Julian here, and today I'm super excited to be showing you how to make music like Deadmau5. This is one that I've gotten a few requests for, and Deadmau5 is one of my favorites of all time, so I wanted to make this video. And as usual, you can get the project file and samples and MIDI and all that kind of stuff in the description for just $5 on my Bandcamp. If you want to help me out, this is a great way to do it. And yeah, let's dive in. So this is a project file you heard in the intro. We're at 128 BPM, pretty standard progressive house kind of tempo. And I'm just going to go through the different elements. So the first one I want to show you is this pluck sound. It's like the kind of standard Deadmau5 pluck everybody talks about. And it's a really simple sound. All it is a saw wave, essentially, and a low-pass filter with an envelope. Now, I've also added some white noise on here for a little bit of texture and a little bit of high-end. But yeah, it's a really simple sound. You just need a saw wave and then the filter, which has the frequency set very low, and then I have the envelope on there doing like this quick kind of pluck sound, and the amp envelope matches that as well, just to keep it all lined up and clean. And yeah, that's really how you make that sound. Nothing too much to it. It's just about the filter envelope. After that, I just have a chorus on there. Pretty simple. It's kind of subtle. The dry wet is up all the way, but since the amount and rate are so low, it's still like a pretty subtle sound. So yeah, this is just adding a bit of stereo width to the sound and just kind of beefing it up a bit. This is a pretty common practice. You probably wouldn't want to just use like just that on its own. It just doesn't have enough sort of to it, I guess. After that, I have a compressor, which is just sidechaining this to the kick. So pretty straightforward, but this sidechaining sound is definitely very important to Deadmau5's style. So it's important to do that in here. You wouldn't want to just have this going like that during like the drop like this. The next layer I have is this bass sound. So this is a pretty simple sound. It's just playing the root notes of the chords, and it's very similar to the chords, actually, in the fact that it is a saw wave with a little bit of white noise, and then this low-pass filter, which has this pluck envelope on it. I believe I just copied down the chord preset for this, which is usually what you would do if you have like a pluck sound like this. You would just make a bass like this. And then I changed a few things because I don't have the chorus on here, and instead I have this erosion, which is just adding a little bit of grit on top of the sound, because this sound is good for the low end, but it wasn't piercing through quite as much in the high end without the erosion as I wanted. So I did the erosion just to give it that kind of like grittier, more saturated, dirty high end. And I think it works pretty well. And then after that, I just also have this sidechain to the kick, just like the pluck. I also want to quickly talk about chords here and like the music theory. So as far as like the kind of progressions you want, the idea here is like using pretty simple major and minor chords, but giving them like this big epic kind of feel, just sort of in your chord choices. Like, as you can hear, the way this sort of resolves to this chord is giving it like this big feel, because it's coming from here to there and then down to there, and like it kind of feels like it's traveling a lot. You know, that's the best way I could describe it, is like it feels like it's traveling. And when I say basic major and minor chords, that's not always the case. Deadmau5 does use a lot of interesting voices in his chords, and he does do a lot of different things with different styles of chords. But as far as like the main basic stuff to learn, you can definitely get by with just these major and minor chords. And if you notice also, what I've done here is these are all basic triads, but I've moved the thirds up an octave. If you don't know what the thirds are, the third is essentially the middle note of these like basic triads. It's the third degree in the scale, and based on whether it's a major or minor chord, you're gonna have a major or minor third. So in this case, this D sharp minor chord is the third is minor, but if this was major like that, then we would have a major third. So I put those up an octave, and what this does is it just kind of spreads out the chord a bit and gives it a little bit more kind of like depth, and it just helps to make it like bigger sounding, because you're taking up a bigger span across the keyboard, if that makes any sense. Like, you have notes as low as this and as high as this, in your chord, it just kind of gives it a little bit more clarity. Like, you can hear the difference between the notes a little bit more, and the space between those notes. So the next thing I'll show you is this white noise thing that I made. And this is definitely pretty popular in Deadmau5's music. It's a very simple sound to make. All it is basically a white noise oscillator and then a bandpass filter. And what you do is you play like one long note with the white noise, and then on the filter, you want to automate the frequency down a bit from top to bottom. And then if you could also do this into like a build if you just had it go from bottom to top, basically, like that. So this is a really simple sound, but an important thing here is to use the bandpass filter. I know, like, I used to do this, and I noticed a lot of people doing this. Sometimes beginners have a tendency to do this with a low-pass filter, and that can work. But as you can hear, there's a lot of low-frequency content being played throughout the whole thing when you use a low-pass filter, whereas when you use the bandpass filter, and I'll show you this on the spectrum here on this EQ, the bandpass filter only lets through a certain range of frequencies that are very like tight and controlled and concentrated to one area. So it's a little bit cleaner sounding because you don't have all that low end going on in the bottom of your sound, and it's not going to take up like a big part of the mix that you need for other instruments. So as far as effects goes on that, I just have a reverb, pretty simple. I just have this on here to give it some space because this was a little bit too dry on its own. I also have it sidechained to the kick, just like the other two elements I showed you. And then I have this EQ8 just cutting out the low end because when it was getting to some of the lower ranges of this filter sweep, I'll show you, like around here, you can kind of hear some of that nasty low end in there, and you don't really want that in your track. It's not really gonna do like what you want it to do with this white noise. Really, you want the white noise for like the high end sweep. And then having that low end there is just low end in there. It's just kind of taking up unnecessary space. So I cut that out with an EQ. Next thing I'll show you is this little atmosphere sample. This is pretty simple. It just plays throughout the track. It's these notes which are in key with the track. Yeah, we're in D sharp minor, so it's playing D sharp, and it's playing the fifth of D sharp, which is A sharp. Pretty simple there, but this is something I want to talk about, and this is something that I think people don't talk about enough in like when they're talking about Deadmau5 production. Something he does very well is he has a lot of atmosphere in his tracks. Like, he never just has it like this, like with just the regular instruments. While that would work, he often has different layers in the background like this, which are adding like a lot of atmosphere. And as you can hear, it's definitely a lot better when you have that thing going in the background. So it's important to have stuff like this. So what I have, I'll show you the original sample. It's some kind of choir sample or something like that. And I've just put it into a simpler here. And what I've done is I've turned on the loop. And then if you move the start time and the length for, like, if you go like this with the start time, move it forward, and then move the length like back a bit, like that maybe. What you can do then is you can turn up this fade here, and so you can loop a short section of it, but it'll loop smoothly, because instead of just starting abruptly there and then ending there and restarting, that doesn't sound the best. With this sound, it's not as noticeable, but it's still important to do it this way. With the fade, what it'll do is it'll sort of like fade up and then fade out, but back into this part, and it'll just be a lot smoother. Like I said, now it's really like just completely seamless, and it's just one long note that can play for as long as you want it to. So that's an important sound design tip if you're gonna do atmosphere things like this. As far as effects go on that, pretty simple. I just have this redux to give it a bit of like a bit crushed kind of sound. And again, that goes with like the same kind of thing I was saying with the bass. This sound was a little bit too like mid-range E. If you look at it on the EQ, a lot of it is happening in this section. Let me make this bigger. A lot of it's happening in this section. And, a lot of it's happening in this section. And what's happening there is, that's not really coming through in the high end. So what I did was I added this redux. And you can already see that it's coming through a lot more on the high end. There's a lot more high end content in there. But I had to add this OCT on there as well. And then that really brings out the high end. So between this Redux and the OTT, it really helps to just give this a little bit more presence in the mix. And again, come through more on the high end where you would want to hear a sound like this. I also have it sidechained, and then I have the EQ8 on there because I needed to cut out some low end. Once you put on OTT, you may not hear it if you're on like phone speakers or something, but there's a lot of low end being added there by the OTT that you really don't want with something like this, so I just cut it out with a steep curve on EQ8. The next thing I will show you is this little pluck lead. It's a pretty simple kind of sound. Basically all it is it's an operator. I set the algorithm to just be like the one where these are just playing side by side. So I'm not doing any FM synthesis even though I'm using operator. But what I have is I have a sine wave with this kind of envelope, which is very similar to, if you remember, the filter envelope of this pluck sound. Again, it's just a short, tight little pluck. And then on top of that, I have a white noise oscillator, which has an even shorter pluck envelope, which is just giving it a little bit of a click. Because the operator, the sine wave on its own was just kind of not enough. So giving it this little click really helps. Man, I cannot talk today. But yeah, so having that click on top really helps. And then I also have filter on here. So what the filter is doing is it's kind of doing a few things. I have the shaper on. If you don't know the shaper, it's just kind of like a distortion. In this case, I have the sine shaper on, and I have the drive all the way up to 12 dB. So that's what's giving it that kind of like more harmonically rich sound than you would probably expect from a sine wave. And it's beefing it up a bit. And then I also have the filter set to a low pass filter, and I've got an envelope on that, which is doing a very similar kind of pluck to what I was describing with the saw wave pluck before. And that's just kind of like giving it a little bit more of a clicky sound, as well as the sine shaper is giving it some harmonics and making it just a little bit more than like just a basic sine wave pluck. As far as like other things go, I really just have this pitch envelope in operator, which is adding another kind of element to give it a bit of a click at the start of the sound. It's very subtle, but you can hear it when I turn it on and off. It's just giving it, again, a little bit more of a click and helping to make this a little bit punchier. As far as effects go, it's pretty simple. I have this auto pan to sort of pan it around to the different ears because there's a lot of stuff that was going on just down the middle in this, and I wanted to give it this element to sort of like go around your sort of stereo field, if that makes any sense. And then I just have this ping pong delay on there doing eighth notes and an EQ8 and a sidechain. EQ8 is just cutting out some low end. The sine shaper can add a little bit of like weird low end to it sometimes, so I like to just cut it out to be sure. And then it's sidechained again to the kick, just like everything else. As far as the notes go on this, so I'm kind of just playing this pattern that fits in the key of the song we're in. It's based around this A sharp, which is the fifth of D sharp, which is the key that we're in. And then at the end here, it goes to this thing. Again, this is like just kind of like a simple pattern that I wrote in. Not too much to say here, other than like just make it repetitive and catchy, but then giving it that little bit of a switch up in the last two bars there really helps as well. So the last thing I'll show you are the drums. Drums are very simple. They just sound like this on their own. And so as far as the kick goes, I mean, I don't really have any processing on it. It's just a matter of choosing these kind of like progressive housey kicks. I notice a lot of times when people make this kind of stuff, they try to use like those big boomier kind of sounds or like the bigger kind of kicks. But for this, you really just want these quick, tight, high-end kicks. Like this one where it has the boomy low end, but it also has a nice high-end click on top of it that helps it to cut through the mix and just really sort of sit right in the mix. As far as the clap goes, again, it's a really simple thing. It's just a nice sample. But this is something I do want to talk about that I hear a lot in Deadmau5's music. is if you notice this clap doesn't just happen right on the beat. There's a little bit of stuff before the beat. I'll split the sample so you can see. This is kind of like the actual clap, but then there's also this stuff that happens before the clap. And what that does is it just kind of like makes the clap sound more smooth and more human, because like if you were say you had like a group of people clapping on the 2 and the 4 of this beat, they wouldn't all clap at exactly the same time. You would have some of them clapping a little bit before, some of them clapping a little after, some of them clapping perfectly on the beat. It would create this kind of staggered effect. And so we're not exactly doing that here, but we are sort of mimicking that by having like a little sound going into the clap. It just gives it kind of a nice feel and makes the clap a little bit smoother. And then as far as the hi-hat goes, really simple there. It's just this closed hi-hat sample. And again, nothing too much to say there, other than just you definitely don't want to use like a big like open hi-hat. I noticed with Deadmau5's music, he uses these tighter, shorter kind of hi-hat samples a lot more often, so you just need to find something like that. But yeah, that's really it for today. Again, pretty simple. It's just a matter of using those big plucks and the big epic kind of chord progressions, and then not forgetting to use the cool atmosphere sounds in the background. And yeah, like I said, that's going to be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think in the comments, and like this video and subscribe. Maybe even share the video if it helped you out. Thank you so much, everybody, for all the support. Make sure to check out the samples from this video in the description. And yeah, I will see you guys again tomorrow with my new tutorial.